Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kate Taylor, and I'm here today with Sam Turner. She is the European Command Gender Advisor and Women, Peace, and Security Program Manager. We are coming to you from Germany, which is where UCOM and AFRICOM are headquartered. So Sam, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited. I'm excited to chat about all the stuff we've got planned.
Yeah. Hey, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to being in this job?
Sure. Oh my goodness. Okay. So to start at school, commissioned 2009, class of 2009, for your freedom of mind. And went into the engineer corps and was stationed over here originally. Did about 4.5 years of active duty, 4.5, 5 years of active duty, and then transitioned to the reserves. While I was on active duty, I actually assessed for the CST program and was selected to do that program, but ended up for one reason or another not going on the actual deployment. And so this is important later. So as I transitioned to the reserves and kind of went through the process of becoming a reserve civil affairs officer, I went through a couple civil military liaison courses with NATO and was chatting with one of the instructors and was talking to her about how when I went through that assessment, when I went through that assessment, for the CST program, that was with all women. That was back before civil affairs took it over. And so we went through with all women, and I was remarking to her how I was really nervous going in, but it was really one of the most lovely experiences of my whole military career because, I was, for the first time in my life, one of the biggest, strongest people that was on the small team that I was in. And so that was a very perception changing experience for me, going through, an all woman assessment. And when I was chatting with her about this, she said, you should look into doing gender in military operations. And I was like, what is that? And so then she explained to me how there's a center of excellence up in Sweden. And at the time they had a field advisor course that you could go on. And so I convinced my commander that, from a human factors perspective and a human terrain perspective, that this was going to be an essential skill for me as a civil affairs officer. And they paid for me to go up to Sweden. And so I was one of the first trained gender field advisors, I think, in the US military. I was like with one of the first cohort of folks that went through this course. Fast forward a couple of years, there's a lot of policy stuff that kind of changed within the US and kind of how we're doing things. And so the combatant commands advertised a gender advisor position, and I applied, and here we are.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
I will take a moment too, since we're at the beginning, to mention that if you're listening in, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom to drop your questions. And if we don't answer them throughout the course of the discussion, we'll get them at the very end.
Yep.
So as we mentioned, your job has two parts: the Women, Peace, and Security, or WPS Program Manager, and Gender Advisor. Right. I'd like to ask you first about Women, Peace, and Security, and then your role as Gender Advisor.
Right. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, in some of our previous discussions, and like you already mentioned, a lot of us, especially in our year groups, have some experience or familiarity with the cultural support teams or the female engagement teams in a very tactical experience. But really, what is Women, Peace, and Security?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because when we were kind of figuring out how to do this, it's like kind of figuring out how to add structure to something that's very nebulous. So to start out and to really understand Women, Peace, and Security, we kind of have to go back to the beginning and have a conversation about, where did it come from? Why do we care about this? Right. What is kind of what the point is. And so if everyone will bear with me, I'll just give you a little bit of a history lesson, and then we can kind of go into how the US views this, and then how the US military kind of manifests support for this. And so one thing that I'll start by saying that So it didn't all begin, but it all kind of formally began in the year 2000 when the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1325. So we are currently in the 20th anniversary year right now of UNSCR 1325. And the reason that this particular Security Council resolution was really, really revolutionary is that it said for really the first time that war, conflict, and natural disaster predominantly negatively affected women and children in the military space. And I think I'm gonna have to close my door because there's barking dogs. Hold on a second. Oops. That was a little loud. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. So this was revolutionary insofar as there's a lot of people who knew this, but for the Security Council to actually proclaim this and say we need to pay attention to this, that was a huge deal. And so there were a couple aspects of UNSCR 1325 that we can kind of tease out as we're talking today. But one of the big ones was participation in security sectors. So getting more women into security sectors, right? Protecting people, civilians, but also women from violence and preventing that violence if possible, and then making sure that we have equitable access to relief and recovery when we're doing those natural disaster crisis response efforts. So from there, the UNSCR resolution said, hey, if you sign this, we want you to tell us how you're going to do it. And so the way that people communicated those plans of how they were going to get to the goals of 1325 was a national action plan structure. And so the United States came out with our national action plan. We had two previously. The first one, I believe, was in 2011, then 2016. And then last year, we published a national strategy on women, peace, and security. So that was in June of last year. Basically it says, hey, here's where we are, here's where we are going, and here's how we're going to get there. So that's the National Action Plan portion of it. In 2017, uniquely, the United States Congress passed the Women, Peace, and Security Act of 2017. So we are the first nation to have what's known as comprehensive legislation mandating that we do that. And the way that the law kind of reads is it talks about taking what's known as a 3D approach to making sure that we get this right. So that's your diplomacy, development, and defense kind of approach. So for those of you who have worked at the strategic level or even the operational level, that whole 2 up, 1 down concept, you'll hear people talk about whole of government. And so that's kind of that 3D approach. So it's good reading if you want to read the strategy. And then soon, the Department of Defense will actually be drilling down a little bit more and have an implementation plan that's going to dictate what it is that DoD is committing to doing when it comes to women, peace, and security writ large. And I will say, before we kind of pivot into the more functional part of my job, that the women, peace, and security agenda, as the United States views it, is bifurcated. We have kind of the internal aspect, the recruitment, the retention. SHARP would be considered to be a part of this program as well, in terms of the prevention of violence aspect. So the United States kind of has the J1 side of the house, or the G1 side of the house, that's more personnel oriented. We keep that separate. What I do is a lot more foreign policy focused. So it's very much outward focused. How do we help our partners and allies? I do a lot of support for NATO. We'll talk about that. But that's like kind of functionally, that's functionally how it manifests within the US structure, specifically within the Department of Defense. Was that a good summary? Okay.
Yeah, that was actually leads me to my next question, which I think you really already answered, which was what are the DoD's responsibilities in WPS? So.
Yeah, I think, like and when it comes to really defining what it is, that we do, one of the cool things about this, and this is like a little bit scary, I think sometimes for us military folks who are really used to having something to like read and be like, here's our doctrine on this, is that a lot of this, we're still kind of figuring out what it looks like. And we look to our partners and allies from a defense perspective, we look to NATO, and we say, here's how other folks are doing this. How should we do it? And so, you know, I think that that is one of the really kind of cool and exciting parts about being involved in this agenda. It's called the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. You know, because there's actually multiple Security Council resolutions that are a part of the family of Security Council resolutions. But I think that, yeah, I think that that's like the really interesting thing, is that there's a lot of latitude right now for us as, you know, security sector participants to really influence what this agenda looks like moving forward, and how we kind of how we manifest it and live it.
Yeah. That sounds incredible. So then in that vein, can you describe some of the things that you've worked on as the WPS program manager at UCOM?
Sure. So, you know, what I do and kind of how it works at UCOM for me as a gender advisor, functionally, is I'm supposed to do a whole bunch of stuff. So contribute to our plans, policies, and procedures. So taking a look at those theater campaign orders that we have, the campaign strategy, and ensuring that we have the aspects of women, peace, and security included into that, right? So that's kind of one aspect of what I do. Another aspect of what I do is to do kind of quick analysis for crisis situations. So, you know, we can talk further about this, especially if we've got folks who are listening in that are interested. You know, we did a quick analysis for the current crisis that we're in now, the corona crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, where we looked at how do women and men experience this crisis differently, right? So we've done that with this particular crisis. We did this with our retaliatory strikes on Syria, actually in support of CENTCOM. I think it was like 2 years ago. So we do that quick analysis part. And then I also advise and train senior leaders on these concepts. So we have a quick training that we do. So I do a lot of training and education, mostly training with senior leaders to get them on board. And then I think the thing that takes up a lot of my time would be my outreach activities that I do to allies and partners. So whether that's NATO, you know, multilaterally, or bilaterally with certain countries that that kind of request our help in terms of what's known as capacity building.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of those allies, some of those partners. I know you have some good vignettes and stories about some of them. So, but before those, what are some of the organizations and entities that you work with?
So we work with all sorts of stripes. We work with what's known as civil society. So I think maybe a lot of you might be familiar with like organizations like SWAN, Service Women's Action Network, or WISE, Women in International Security. So civil society organizations that advocate for that, organizations that advocate for you know, protection of women. So women's shelters sometimes. We work with the OSCE. I don't directly work with the UN, but we're very much tied into UN systems and kind of like ways of doing things. And then our biggest partner that we work with from a multilateral standpoint would be NATO, specifically in this area of operations, as well as you know, other nations. And then we cooperate with other COCOMs. So we cooperate, you know, across the spectrum. You know, we provide support to, like I told you, we provide support to CENTCOM if they need it. You know, we've been supporting NORTHCOM during COVID just to give them an extra set of eyes on what it is that they're looking at, and to really make sure that we, you know, that we're kind of getting stuff as right as we can, as quick as we can, to make it useful for warfighters.
Yeah. So before I transition to ask more about your role as the gender advisor, what else did you want to share about women, peace, and security?
I think one thing that we haven't talked about yet, but you and I had talked about previously about how to frame what it is that we're going to talk about next, is the difference between sex and gender. And so I think that it's really important when we talk about being a gender advisor. It's a really like surprisingly controversial job title. And I think a lot of that has to do with what's happening in popular culture right now. You know, and what we understand these two words to mean. A lot of times, sex and gender are meant to be the same thing. or they're used interchangeably. And so like one of the things to understand about what it is that I do and the value that I bring to warfighters, and when I advise the commander to do one thing or the other, is that sex is biological. So sex is your parts, it's your hormones, it's how you were, it's how you were born. A lot of times people talk about sex being assigned at birth, based on what sex organs it looks like you have. And then there's also something called intersex, which is when you have a mixture of both. And that is something that is, relatively speaking, fairly prevalent. It's about 1.4% of the population. So for those of you who are tuning in, like, you have led intersex soldiers before. They might not have known that they were intersex, but or maybe they did. But a lot of times, I don't think that we necessarily know or understand these things. And so the big takeaway for that, when I talk to senior leaders, and they're kind of like, oh, okay, is, folks who are intersex oftentimes have different medical needs than, people who are not, right? So, so that's sex. And then gender is socially constructed, culturally dependent roles, responsibilities, and opportunities of men and women in a given society, right? So the adage that I use normally is, where are you from originally?
Oh, I come from an Army family, so
Okay,
usually claim Northern Virginia. We'll go with that.
Northern Virginia. Okay. That's like self enough, right? So like, did you experience, or did you ever observe kind of like that Southern belle, maybe had some classmates when you were younger that, like, kind of were socialized in a way to be like ladies and Southern belles, right?
That's I've seen it in the States, not so much in the DC area.
Okay, maybe not in the DC area, but you've seen it, you've seen it enough, right? Or the whole adage that, boys shouldn't cry, right? These are things that are socialized on us. And it's not that they're, and when I say that, Southern belles or young men being told to be very stoic, it's not necessarily that it's good or bad, right? We're not delineating, oh, this is bad that this is happening, or this is good. It's simply being aware. And within the US context, we have such a rich diversity of different ways that people are almost socialized, or what is normal for them, right? Growing up, just regionally. So I'm from Western New York. And even the delineation between Western New York and like the New York City area is incredibly, like, it's very, very, almost like not polar opposites, but it's very, very different, right? So when we talk about how gender is socially constructed, that's what we're talking about. And when we talk about something being culturally dependent, that's, has to do with a cultural context. So a lot of times, for folks who've got experience deploying to Afghanistan or Iraq, that is a non-Western culture. And the way that we behave, the way that we should behave, the way that we should operate, and what is normal and what is accepted is different than it is in our context, right? So, but it's different than being a cultural advisor, right? Because we do a little bit more of a deep dive. We go down, so here's the cultural aspect, and then we say, okay, in that society, what are women expected to do? What are they required to do? What are they required to do in order to be considered full members of society? Are they full members of society? What are men required to do? What are boys required to do? And so it's that next layer of the human terrain, basically, that we kind of deep dive into, and we try and shine a light in order to gain a military advantage. So when we talk about gender advising, it's really, really important that we understand the delineation between those two, and that we really separate it from maybe a lot of the culture war type conversation that might be happening, that we might observe in the media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So once maybe you're speaking to a senior leader and you give them that baseline understanding,
yeah.
What's something that you have to do next to maybe shape their understanding, something that you've done at UCOM, maybe some of the conversations you've had, or some of the things that you've had to work on with staffs?
Yeah. So I think that we're really early days. So this is not something that I would say has permeated the collective mind. of the Army or like the military in general. Um, and so a lot of times what it is that I try and do when I talk to senior leaders is make this as accessible and as familiar as I can to them in terms of figuring out different situations or operations that they have been on, and then pulling examples of where the military has really gotten what it is that we are supposed to do right, or more often, unfortunately, where we haven't gotten it right. And so, you know, a lot of times when I talk or coach, talk with or coach senior leaders, it's really trying to help them to tie this to their own experience, to get them to understand the value of it. So that's kind of like where we are. If you are familiar with like cultural, organizational change, we're like still pretty early days with a lot of this stuff. And so far as we're still trying to really articulate the value proposition for this. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, you know, we aren't really formally teaching it in PME yet. You know, there's not a lot of training that exists that's really off the shelf that we can give to NCOs and have them go and, you know, and do the training. So like, that's how early days we are. But it is very exciting, and it is very, it's very, very rewarding when you talk to a senior leader and you say, you know, hey, sir, hey, ma'am, you know, I understand that you were here at this particular time. Remember when this happened? And then they'll go, oh, yeah, I remember. And a lot of times, depending on what rank they are, they were like maybe sort of in charge of whatever was happening. And so to have that conversation with them and see that light bulb go on is very, very, it's very satisfying. But I will say that like, sometimes like you really have to work to convince people, that this is something that we should be really putting our brain power into, right? And that we should be considering when we do staff planning and that type of stuff. So it's a chicken and an egg type thing, right now, in terms of getting ourselves to good enough so the Army can start taking this, knowledge and really making it functional.
Yeah, I have worked with the Marines before. So the one story you told me about, we're talking to the US MIL rep.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
That
Yeah.
one I thought was particularly satisfying.
Yeah. So that is the, conversation that I had. Oh my goodness. With the US MIL rep to the, military committee at NATO HQ that advises the North Atlantic Council, which is like the political side of NATO. And this guy, God bless him, like it was really, really hard for me to get a meeting with him. And I think I deal with that a lot because of my job title, both of my job titles, whether it's Women, Peace and Security Program Manager or Gender Advisor. There's a lot of people who I think are kind of like, nope, that doesn't have anything to do with what my job is. So it was very difficult to get a meeting with him. But I was able to. I did a lot of research before I went in. I figured out where he was, you know, how many kids he had, what his kids, were doing, and he has two kids who are Marines. Well, like they're a dual military couple, right? I believe his son is married to another Marine. And so I even like found out how he takes his coffee, like, you know. So I researched this guy, right? Because I wanted to make sure. One of the things that's a little bit, it's a challenge, but it's also frustrating with his job, is you only have that one time to make a good impression, and if you mess it up, that's it. So
Yeah.
I was super nervous, like walked in talking to this 3-star general. We did our whole little training thing, and at the end of it, you know, I kind of said, you know, hey, sir, you know, do you have any questions of me? And he said, you know, no questions. You know, a lot of this made sense to me. Just one comment. I really wish that somebody would have explained this to me when I was gender integrating the 2nd Marine Division. And I was like, I like got goosebumps, and, you know, was like, oh my goodness, yes, like we got it. And this person to this day is an ally of this program, insofar as, you know, anything that we need, you know, especially as we you know, advise and work with NATO, he is a huge ally. So, you know, a lot of times, you know, we have these conversations with people. They you know, there's a lot of kind of like, you know, door closing when it comes to women. People think that this is women's issue. issues, you know, when we're providing security for a society, right? If that's one of the aspects of our missions that we have, is to provide a safe and secure environment, that society, it doesn't just consist of just men, right? It consists, its societies are incredibly complex. And the way that people experience and move throughout societies is not a monolith. And so for us, teasing that out of there, and then to get a senior leader to kind of have that light bulb moment, was just, it was absolutely amazing. And now, you know, we've coached him to tell some of his own stories that really tie into the WPS agenda. So we built an advocate and a champion through that engagement that we had with him. But oh my goodness, it was it was touch and go there for a minute. I was very nervous because, you know, Marines are very, you know, they're very stoic and like chiseled and all that good stuff. So.
He was a Marine 2-star general?
3-star.
3-star general.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So we've gotten a few comments, and then also we just got a question that I think is now is a good time to ask.
Sure.
So the question is, you spoke about your job title or gender issues being a roadblock in many ways. How do you overcome this when interacting in a very hierarchical structure where titles are important?
So think that is a very good question. So one thing that I will say is that I'm at a huge advantage because I wear this instead of what you're wearing, right? People can't readily see what my rank is. They could find out if they dug, right? And I'll submit to you, it's not a very high rank, right? So, you know, so part of it is the fact that I'm a civilian. I'm a bit more, I think, advantaged in that way. But I think that, you know, kind of pushing through or as you frame what it is that you're doing to really make sure that you are figuring out what is important to that individual. You know how like we get graded on like OERs and stuff about influencing outside of the chain of command, right? Figuring out what motivates that particular leader, what are the wicked problems in their staff section or as a commander that they are trying to solve right now, and then just figure out and to tie how my program or doing what it is that I do in a more deliberate way will help them solve those problems. And, you know, I think that, you know, the hierarchical nature of the military is always going to be a problem. Power structures, you know, are always a barrier. And it's very, very difficult when you're a junior officer to poke your head out and say, you know, well, what about this, right? Because we have definitely a negativity bias in the military where I think sometimes, you know, when like even a captain says something in a meeting, people are like, I'm sorry, who let you into this room, right? So, so I think that would be one way that I would say that you could influence would be really to kind of, you know, and then when you introduce yourself to people, have your elevator pitch ready, right? To say, you know, and to not take stuff too personally. Like I've had people say some pretty crazy things to me about my job title, and to be able to just let it, you know, roll off your back and be like, yeah, actually, and also, you know, here's this other thing, and here's how it is that I can, you know, sir, you did a town hall the other day and you said that we were struggling with this. My program can help you get after that. Let me meet with your staff so that I can help you solve those problems and contribute to the team. So I think, you know, being focused, I don't want to dismiss how hierarchical the military is. It's really difficult. But I think for me specifically, as a civilian, I'm advantaged in certain ways that I think uniform folks are not. So I can kind of move in and out of situations, and as long as I'm more or less dressed correctly, people will allow me to move in and out of situations. To be completely honest with you.
Yeah, and then in the past, in our past discussions, when we've discussed some of the challenges that you faced, some of the things that you've highlighted that you touched on just now, was how you've been effective in getting people to allow you in the room.
Yes.
And then having kind of that gravitas to speak up at the right times. And then when you are speaking up, being able to be a gifted communicator. So like you just said, again, your elevator pitch, like, so when you have have that attention span of that senior leader or that key influencer, being able to speak well for yourself or your issue. And then the other thing I heard that you mentioned is just being able to make that person understand how you are enabling them.
Exactly. Like, I think a lot of people, and this is very sad for me to say this, I think a lot of people view women, peace, and security folks or gender advisors in title as though we have something to do with Sharp or perhaps EEO. And I will say that this is not a knock on those programs. Those programs are absolutely needed, absolutely essential for us to have a diverse, lethal fighting force. But I think a lot of it is on us, and that we have kind of maybe right now a bit of an advertising problem. And a lot of that, when you figure out how to get at the root cause of it, it goes back to PME and introducing these things, as early as BOLIC or CGSC, so that people are like, oh yeah, I remember that women, peace, and security stuff. I've heard of it before, right? Because when people are put in a situation where they might feel as though they don't know, right? That puts them in a vulnerable situation. And as you maybe have observed, specifically with a lot of the men that we work with, because we work in a very hyper masculine environment, they're not used to being, in the not knowing, right? So especially if you know that you've got a leader that is like that wants to know, that needs to know everything, do yourself a favor and send them an info paper before you meet with them. Do yourself a favor and find an ally, perhaps maybe a male ally, to warmly introduce you to that person and to be a sponsor, as it were, of your work. And then exactly like you said, like when it's your go time, like go, right? And that's one thing that I think, at least I've observed within the West Point women community, is like, we're normally, when the spotlight is on us, majority of us are like, okay, this, just because we are more visible as women in the military, right? So we really do need to be prepared for when the spotlight is on us, which it oftentimes is, whether we like it or not, that we are doing our absolute best. And so we could argue about how fair that is, but like, it is what it is. And I think that's what makes us actually really quite good at what we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me of our other conversation about how half the time it's just about taking the chance, which a lot of women are generally reticent to do. So,
oh my gosh. Yeah. And like putting yourself out there. And I mean, I think, and this is more just general, advice, putting yourself out there and understanding, like we had for those of you who are watching, like Kate and I had a lot of really like rah, heartwarming conversations about how, and we can talk about this more later as we like wrap up with our feel good comments, right? But like, you as West Point women are some of the most qualified leaders in the world. And realizing that, and realizing, especially how much that matters for our partners and allies to see women in our militaries, the other women that we work with, that's really, really important to them. And up until recently, we've never talked about this, but up until recently, I was in the reserves. And so I actually used to ask when I would go on engagements, we got permission from legal at UCOM. I used to actually ask before I would go on engagements, would you like for me to be in uniform, or would you like for me to be in civilian clothes? And a lot of times if I was working at the operational level or below, they would say, if you could come in uniform, that really would be great. I did a training in Latvia with the Enhanced Foreign Presence missions there. That's like the deterrence mission we have with NATO. So the Canadian mission asked me if I could come and do a gender training with their folks. And I asked them, I said, would you like for me to come in uniform? And they were like, that would be fantastic. Mm-hmm. So, also like being able to kind of camouflage yourself and then be confident enough to go in there and say, hey, I've got this. And, they invited me because they know that I'm capable of this. And I feel like a lot of our experiences, especially, when we're at the academy or maybe as junior officers, sometimes they can be really like, I guess I don't want to be too negative, but they can be really challenging and they can really kind of beat you down. And, you know, don't be overly confident. Don't be like cocky, right? But like, just know that like you've trained for this. Like, this is your, you know, any situation you're in, you don't have to be a gender advisor, but like you have trained for this and you can do it. And like that is one thing, and that people look to us to be the example. I know we all say this all the time, like on the Facebook group, and we're all like cheering for each other. And I used to actually not think that it was real. It's real. It's very real. Like, and so just to make sure that you're, you know, just be confident in what it is that you're doing, and understand that you even being there, like you, Kate, being wherever it is that you are in uniform, you know, is a very powerful statement in and of itself. So we got to the feel good stuff early, but
Yeah, unintentionally, to be sure. There was one more vignette I wanted to ask about while we were still talking on gender advising, and it was when you went to Albania.
yeah, yeah, and actually one of our partners, I think, is actually on the call listening in. So that, you know, we at UCOM, and this is kind of like demonstrative of, you know, not only the power of cooperation, but exactly certain aspects of women, peace, and security that we can get at, you know, through cooperation. Is, you know, there was a grant program through USAID, which is our development arm of the U.S. government, and they were looking at getting after, I believe, WPS themes. And like Sarah will correct me via WhatsApp after this if I got any of it wrong. But you know, they did a project proposal where they were talking about doing community engagement with youth and also with women in order to counter violent extremism, right? And you might say like, okay, like I don't necessarily see how those two are, you know, necessarily linked, but you know, a lot of it was based on the fact that, you know, we have a lot of returning foreign fighters coming back from, you know, lands far away. Albania is a Muslim majority country, you know, and for one reason or another, there was a certain vulnerability in the youth to be prone to violent extremism in some cases. And so the way that they got after that was to basically focus on doing youth engagement and then engaging the women to not only recognize the signs and symptoms of radicalization, but to use a community approach in order to prevent those types of things before they even started to happen, right? And, you know, I wasn't necessarily involved in the nuts and bolts of like doing the things, but I helped with the grant writing, you know, and I went over and did a couple trainings with them where we did some basics of women, peace, and security. How do you do women, peace, and security? You know, how do you kind of take these principles and lay them out in, you know, a 3 or 4 step process? You know, how do you get after it? And then making sure that as they designed these community engagements, to make sure they had the right people in the room. So to take an intersectional look at that and saying, okay, you know, we want to make sure we're engaging men as well. We want to make sure that we're getting everyone from different regions, right? Different socioeconomic backgrounds, folks who have differing religious beliefs, right? In order to make sure that the community that we're engaging is the whole of the community. And that overall, you know, if we're talking about, you know, the strategic political perspective, that nests into their security. You know, so we have a vested interest in stemming a lot of that stuff before it even happens. And that was a really, really interesting 3D example of how we cooperated and applied the principles of women, peace, and security. We know that mothers are some of the first lines that recognize radicalization. We know that women in societies are the keeper of the culture. You know, we know that youth was prone to these types of things, and then the practitioners that were there on the ground figured out how to get after that problem, and we supported them. And so it was really, really, from soup to nuts, a really, really wonderful project that right now I think they're in the transition phase and they're getting ready to make it sustainable so that Albania can continue to do that themselves.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then was it also in Albania that you went to an LGBTQI ball?
Oh yes, that as well. When I was there for one of the engagements, we went to the LGBTQI ball, and their minister of defense was there. And the thing that was really interesting about that, which was very much different from, I think, how we would experience Pride, say, for example, in the US, was this, that I think there was maybe only 2 or 3 people that were out there, and they were all women. And then that precipitated a conversation with the folks that I was there supporting and talking about how dangerous it was for men to be out in Albania, and how it just didn't happen, and how the women who were actually out at this ball were in some ways putting themselves in actual danger by being out, and to take that experience and kind of contrast it with a lot of what it is that we, observe in the US, was really, really, really fascinating for me. When we're talking about making sure that we are building understanding and designing projects and solutions with our allies that work for them, right? And making sure that we're meeting them where they're at, and not kind of taking our view of what the US does and has and should be and plopping it on them, that we more or less meet them where they're at, and make sure that we're not trying to rush things too quickly, depending on, where they're at. And it was a really lovely experience. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, so with that, what is the future of women, peace, and security and gender advisors on staffs within the DoD, at different echelons? Who's being selected to fill these jobs? Are they going to be civilians? And are other services cultivating this knowledge and this ability?
Yeah. So there's a lot of aspects there. So if I forget any one of them, please just remind me. So, I would say that the future of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, as DoD is implementing it, is going to become very clear. And I hope I don't get yelled at for this when this document comes out. So this is the draft. This is the draft. It might look different. This is the draft DoD implementation guide as to how it is that the DoD is going to get after this. And I would say, and we didn't start this conversation by caveating that the opinions that I'm saying and the stuff that I'm saying today is my own, and I really only speak for UCOM. So right now I am really going to give you my personal opinion on this stuff. This needs to be soldier-led. This needs to be uniform-led, and here's why. And we need to make sure that we can talk about making sure it's career enhancing and not detracting from people's careers. But if you, Kate, at the level that you're at right now, serve as a gender advisor for, say, a year, right? And then you go back into the pool and you take command, you go to CGSC, and then you do your Iron Major time, and you get picked up for battalion command. When you are a battalion commander and you are out doing some sort of mission, or you're supporting an exercise or a deterrence mission that we have, you will ask your staff, did you consider the gender differences in the area that we are about to go into? You will ask that question. And so that's one of the reasons why I very firmly believe, Sam's opinion, that this needs to be soldier, sailor, airman, Marine led. It needs to be uniform led. I will say right now that there is, the other services are definitely looking at this. Other services provide folks at different echelons and in different positions to be gender advisors in different places, right now. But I think, and again, this is just Sam's opinion, we fight where people live. Land operations between us and the Marine Corps, land operations are very human-centered. And so I think that there's a huge opportunity for the Army, and we are trying to position ourselves, and when I say ourselves, I mean like me as an alumni of the Army, right? As leading voices in this, just because that's our experience base, right? 100% joint, everything like that. But I think that, we talked a little bit about, if you're interested in this stuff, every single one of the combatant commands that you're at, if you're at the joint level, has a gender advisor. Seek them out and ask how you can help if you are interested in this. If you're at the operational level or the tactical level, I'm not sure that we have too many. In Indo-PACOM, I believe at the operational level, they've got gender advisors, or what we call focal points, which is people who have the knowledge, but it's an extra duty. we are looking to go that way. We are looking to go that way at UCOM. You know, and then all the way down at the tactical level, we're not exactly sure what it'll look like yet. But you know, these types of things as assets for commanders in order to fight better and be more lethal, they're coming, right? To do that human factor analysis, or what we call a gender analysis, or I've even heard people calling it human security. You know, we've got a branding, we're figuring out the branding, but this is going to be something that's happening at all echelons, and it's something that you know, if you'd like to learn more about, you know, some of the processes and things like that, unfortunately, there's not too much. There's a lot of reading from a development diplomacy standpoint, but not so much from a defense. So, like, you know, here's my shameless plug: like, join our team. We need help. We need people to help us do this. And I'm a little biased when I say that I think that West Point women should lead the way on this, because it's like, you know, I'm lonely and I need more West Point women to come and help. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's so important for us to make sure that we bring that experience, that knowledge, and that leadership to the team. And I would say, you know, right now, the way that the structure exists is we are actually codified in the National Defense Authorization Act. So there's money allocated. So that's why I said, you know, if you're at the joint level and you're at a combatant command, there is one of me at every single combatant command, and a lot of the functionals as well. Stratcom, Cybercom, Transcom, all of them have gender advisors. A lot of them are pretty new. Many of them don't have military experience. And so again, that's an opportunity for us to collaborate and to amplify and to, you know, really support what those folks are doing at a very high level. But, you know, again, if you're interested in, and if you're the operational level or below and you're interested, I'm going to like sign myself up, like reach out to me and we can chat about what that would look like. You know, because we're always looking to have folks that want to learn and that want to support and that can give us some perspectives that we don't necessarily see when we're up at the level that we're at. Did I hit all the points that you wanted me to hit on that?
Yeah, absolutely, and very thoroughly. So to that
Okay.
end, what qualities make someone a best fit for the job?
You know, so we talked a little bit about this, like, is there a certain branch or you need to have an open mind. You need to be curious about, you know, the operational environment. You need to be curious about people. You know, a lot of the qualities that make a good leader make a good gender advisor. And that's why, you know, again, in my biased opinion, you know, we have a lot of that, right? You know, asking questions instead of assuming, you know, being confident and competent, and coming in and being able to really clearly and concisely communicate in a way that we're really getting at, you know, how does this affect the mission? How does this affect our risk? You know, so from what I've observed anecdotally, you know, that is what makes a good gender advisor. But it doesn't necessarily, you know, it's not based on your branch. All stripes. We need all stripes, because, you know, women, peace, and security, and applying some of the tools, I guess I would say, of the agenda to be functional. A lot of it is very, it's cross-cutting, right? So whether you're a finance officer or you're an infantry officer, once you learn the basics, you're going to have stories to tell where you've actually done this yourself. It's just putting the language to it. And a lot of times the way that I frame it is, you know, before you have the language to describe, for example, some of the stuff that we learned during SHARP training, like what is harassment, right? What is rape, right? Before we have that language, we don't really know how to describe it. And that's a very heavier version of, you know, some of the stuff that we bring to light through our work with gender advising, right? Is we see this stuff, intuitively you know it. It's just we're trying to standardize the process, make it iterative, and plug it into what it is that you already do as an intel officer, engineer officer, and that type of thing. And that is where we need help. That is where we can use more folks who are interested in helping us out and getting involved in the community.
Yeah, that was very well said. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So, and then that was the last of all of the questions that I had written down. So I did just want to mention some of the things that we had discussed that we had talked about that were really key that I know you wanted to get across. And I think it did, but it really resonated when you said it to me that women, peace, and security is really it's not just about women; it's about creating durable peace.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
and I think,
Especially,
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, especially for those of us who've lost classmates, you know, do we, and this is not a political statement, is it the military's job to be fighting wars for 20 years? I would argue no. It's our job to get in, get out, get the job done, with a minimal risk to, our fighting forces, and do, to be honest with you, the minimal amount of damage while accomplishing our goals. And I think that there's been a huge reckoning within the DoD community when it comes to how we do military design, how we design operations, right, and apply maybe some creative thinking to what it is we do, how we collaborate with our diplomatic folks, and we talk through things before we start shooting, right? Which of course is above, like, especially, I think a lot of people don't ever reach the echelon where they get to that point, right? I mean, I'm certainly not there, but I think that this job has made me definitely reflect on, a lot of that loss, and to say, creating that durable peace that works for everybody is what makes it so that we can train and we can exercise, but we're not necessarily out there, fighting wars, right? We're preparing, we're standing by, but we're not necessarily having to intervene, as it were.
Yeah. And then we just got another question.
Mhm.
So since we only have a few minutes left, it's in reference to the plan, the draft plan, and asking when it's going to come out. So
Um, I don't know if anyone who watches this is going to be class of '86, but they could call the SecDef up and ask him. Hopefully, it will be soon. Hopefully, it will be soon. But the I think that and I don't even want to. I don't even want to put. I don't even want to put a date on it. But I do know that it's on SecDef's desk right now, and it's also important to note that USAID, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of State all have plans as well, that they will drop those plans as soon as we get ours signed, because we're the last one out of the airplane right now. So so it will be hopefully soonish, but yeah. So I don't know. I thought for one second that that was a friend of mine that I invited to come, who was like a USMA grad, and I was like, maybe, like. But,
no, they said
yeah.
they'd like to make it reading in their environmental security course at West Point.
So I would say, yeah, I would say I'm not exactly sure. However, there are things that are akin to what's coming out that I see that that's from Mindy. If you want to contact me, DM me. I can give you some reading that gets kind of after some of the principles that we were thinking about, especially as you're doing your lesson plans for next semester. But like, hopefully it'll be out by then. I really hope.
Perfect.
Okay.
And then please anyone else that's listening, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. The next thing I wanted to mention that we had discussed was why we wanted to, one of the reasons we wanted to do this in the first place, which is that it's not just because we think this is something that's fun, women, peace, and security, and gender advising, but that it's policy change that's coming.
Yep.
And so the more we can embrace it, the better. And I like the term you used when we spoke last, which is right now it's the Wild West.
Yeah, it is the Wild West, and we need more sheriffs in town, to go with that metaphor. I mean, it is very much, it's something that's always been important, and again, and now we're formalizing it. And so, the folks who are getting in on this, especially folks who have uniform experience, we're the plank holders. And it's actually, from a programmatic standpoint, it's actually really super, super interesting to be someone who's one of the first people through the chute on this, and to see the challenges that you have. Because not only you work all the way, I work all the way from the tactical all the way up to like just like kissing the White House level, right? You know, so we advise OSD on how to put out the policy. Hopefully there will be a DODI that comes out eventually. I can share that that is something that they want to do. They want to do a .mil MPF process for those that are familiar with that, which is basically, you know, the doctor and the personnel going through all the way down through the joint force and figuring out how we're going to staff this and then figuring out what does this look like. But right now it is 100% like, that's why I'm saying like, hey, anybody who wants to get in on this, let's do it, because we need folks with differing experiences to come in and say, you know, hey, here's what I think this should look like in the intel cycle. Here's what this should look like in the targeting cycle. Here's how you should do this when you're figuring out logistics log trains, right? So we need lots and lots of minds to be contributing to the conversation. And a lot of that is like, just because people just don't know, they just don't know about it. So this is like our advertising tap dance that we're doing to say like, you know, hey, everybody come and join, right? You know, because I think a lot of, you know, and this is very topical too, I think a lot of policy and stuff like that is done behind closed doors. And we don't have access to it, especially as women. And so I think that this is super unique, and that, you know, there really is an opportunity for folks who are interested in this to contribute meaningfully to the conversation. And like that is, you know, kind of part of why, you know, I wanted to do this as well, is because we just need more and different and diverse voices.
Well, I think that is the perfect note to end on. So unless you had anything you wanted to add, this is your time.
I don't, unless I don't think that there's any other questions or anything like that, but I would say, you know, for everyone who is interested, you know, to feel free to reach out to me. I'll do my best to field any follow-on questions when we post this. And I would like to say for everyone who watches this, that Kate did all of the legwork for this. She wrote the questions, she reached out to me, she interviewed me like 3 times. So like, I'm the lazy one here, benefiting from your excellent preparation. And Kate, I am so excited to welcome you into this community and to work with you in the future. And anybody else who wants to join, we need you. So thank you so much. This was awesome.
Oh no, thank you, Sam.